Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another Doing Business in webinar with the Football Transfer Forum and the European Football Agents Association. And we are waking up to, after a stunning night of football, with the knowledge that next week it will be England versus Germany at Wembley. I'm very excited because I'm going to the game. I didn't know that was going to be the fixture, obviously, so I feel very, very lucky. But it feels like the tournament has just sparked into life last night. And what a time to be talking about doing business in England. I want to welcome everybody onto the webinar this morning. We've got a fascinating 90 minutes ahead of us. As always, we are joined by Football Transfer Forum Chief Exec and Founder, Tony Sharkey. Good morning, Tony.
Morning, Ryan. Yeah, last night it was a bit of a sort of, at one stage it was England-Portugal, then it was England-Hungary, and then finally, we've got Germany, and it's, we know it's going to be extra time and penalties. We do, don't we, already? So yeah, I wish I could come. If you have a spare ticket, I'll get myself down to Wembley with you guys, and yeah, I'm sure it'll be a great game. To be honest, I'm just pleased we've avoided France. I'm just pleased we have.
Good stuff. Well, we've got so much to get through this morning, and we're really pleased to be joined by our special guest, David Seligman from Branco. Good morning, David.
Morning, how are you doing?
We're well, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for being with us this morning. So I'll just go through what it is that we're going to get through today together. Tony, you've been waiting for this one, haven't you? We've been desperately building up to this point because this is your time to shine, Tony. You've been an agent in this country for 20 years. If you don't smash the ball out of the park this morning, then it's time to hang up the boots, isn't it?
Thanks for putting me under pressure there, Ryan. But it's part 8, and we've saved the best, in my opinion, to last, or the biggest to last. And obviously, we've done some of the other countries with Germany, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Brazil, USA, France. But England is the big one, the big one for me. It knocks everything out of the ballpark. And yeah, I'm so pleased to be contributing.
Fantastic. So we'll be hearing from Tony in a different manner to what you guys are perhaps used to this morning, for those of you that have been on the call previously. And after that, we'll be speaking to David. Of course, he's a solicitor at Branco, so we'll be speaking a bit about the impact of Brexit on acting as an agent in England, a bit around dual rep and what the consequences of some of the changes that government have put into place here as well for you guys. Then Tony, a little bit later on, we're going to get to have a bit of a play with one of the GBE calculators, courtesy of, well, I'll let you introduce them.
Catenaccio.
Catenaccio, of course, rolls off the tongue.
The old Baresi, Franco Baresi sort of role, I suppose. Yeah. Catenaccio AI. But yeah, we'll have a good look at that later on, and that sort of marries in with David's piece about Brexit as well.
Fantastic. So just a bit of housekeeping for those that are tuning in. If you've got a question, and we love questions, please get them in the Q&A box. There's a panel discussion at the end of the session, and we'll get through as many questions as you can. Any general chat, if you want to share your LinkedIn details or your Twitter address or anything like that, put it in the chat box. Feel free to do a bit of networking now if you've got any general comments in there as well. And Tony, I'm going to throw this out there today. As Tony said, this is in terms of an actual territory, this is the last one for this season. We have got another event coming up next month, which we'll tell you about at the end of the session. But I'm interested to hear from you guys. What other territories in the world would you perhaps like us to focus on in the future? So have a think about it. I don't mind where you go. Maybe not the Falkland Islands or somewhere like that. That might be a bit niche. But have a think.
Ryan, we'll have to do, the next ones live, won't we? So we'll
so
probably
think
have to
about
go
it.
and do Brazil again. That would be a good one to do live, wouldn't it?
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
any other suggestions are welcome.
Good stuff. Well, let's get into it, Tony. Let's get into it, and I'll share my screen again and introduce your section here. Tony, like I mentioned, you've been a registered agent in this country for, I'm right in saying approaching 20 years now?
Yeah, it'll be next year, 20 years, 19 years.
Do you get like a sort of silver watch off the FA or anything like that?
I don't. No, I don't. No? I just keep paying me money year after year. And to be honest, Ryan, we're doing this today about how to do business in England, and over those 19 years, the rules have changed so many times. You've almost got to constantly keep abreast of the changes. And certainly in the last couple of years, things have changed dramatically, very, very quickly. So we always seem to be on shifting sands as agents. I don't know whether everyone else feels that in whichever country they are working in, but the rules are always being tweaked. And this is literally, hot off the press information that's just come to us within this month, really.
Excellent. Right, let's get into it then, Tony.
Yeah, if you can share the first slide. We talked about, what I'm going to talk about is the football landscape, and I'm going to break that down into the club landscape. We're going to talk a little bit about the Premier League and the Championship. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the agent landscape in England. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the FA, the process you have to go to if you do want to register in this country, or if you're already registered, some of the things to look out for. So some of the key important points, just to make sure that you're familiar with how the FA administers football agents in England. So the club landscape, I thought I'd put this graphic up because it's the Euros. And as you can see, there's a nice little pie chart there of where the players are coming from for the Euros. And the reason I put it up is the Premier League is up there, 116 players, far more than the Bundesliga, Serie A and La Liga. But then in fifth place is the Championship with 32 players, and that's got a little bit of a head start over League One. League One. So you might sort of say, oh, look, Ligue 1 sell all their best players, and apart from PSG and Lille, and a couple of other clubs, Monaco, Lyon, and what have you, the best players are going out of France. But it's just interesting to note that we've got almost 150 players from clubs in England in the Euros, Ryan. And I think it's obviously with Scotland and Wales also qualifying, I think that's helped the figures. But when you look at the Premier League and that advantage, that's a lot of players are different from the other leagues.
Yeah, and Tony, just the Championship generally, fifth biggest league in Europe by revenue, and it's just an enormous league, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why we want to focus on the Championship as well as the Premier League. The media obviously focus on Premier League, the big deals, who's going to Manchester United, Man City, and the rest of them. But the Championship is such a strong second league, and there's some really big clubs there, and the finances are good. We're going to talk about that in a short while. Do not overlook the Championship. I must say we're concentrating on them two leagues really because it's a European-wide webinar. Obviously League One and League Two, there's some good clubs in League One, the likes of Sunderland, Portsmouth, Sheffield Wednesday will be in League One. But just
potentially Derby.
Well, that was the latest news, wasn't it, Ryan, that Derby are getting a fine, and they could even be deducted points, which it might mess up the fixtures, but if they get relegated, that's another big club. And so England, obviously, it's very strong through all its divisions, but today we're just going to focus on the Premier League and the Championship. So let's look at the Premier League. Everyone knows the strength of the Premier League. 20 clubs. The clubs that have just been promoted: Watford, Brentford, and who was the other one? Just remind me. Watford, Brentford, and
Norwich.
Yeah. Those clubs on promotion get a bonus to the income of 120 million just by getting into the Premier League. So it's a significant increase to their budget. And you know, from Kieran Maguire's work, the Premier League is I think the biggest and best payer of all of the leagues generally. Ryan, in a second, is going to share a little graphic that shows, you know, the Premier League started, what was it, 1992? So we've had about almost 30 years of the Premier League. So Ryan, if you could just make that a little bit bigger, this graphic is going to show you the weekly wages in the Premier League from its inception. So obviously at the top of it starts off Liverpool we're paying £3,500 a week. Wimbledon, who many of you might not be familiar with, £1,250 a week, and clubs everywhere in between. And if you look at Man United, for example, they're just on sort of par with Liverpool. There's some of the usual suspects, I suppose. Man City's there. Man City was a totally different club in those days. And then let's just run the graphic, Ryan.
Yeah, I've put the link to this in the chat, guys, in case it doesn't run as smooth over Zoom, so you can and you can make reference to it later as well. But you'll be able to see how rapid the changes are.
Yeah, Man United coming out ahead, and there you go, back to Liverpool. And then some of the usual suspects coming up. I won't do a racing commentary, Ryan. I'll just let it run its course. But
I was just stopping it on 1999 there, Tony, because I think, you know, we mentioned this recently as well. You know, in 1999, so, you know, Manchester United won the treble that year. You know, this year, Glasgow Rangers had a bigger wage bill than Manchester United this year, which I just think is just a fascinating stat.
Yeah, and then the 20 years after, we'll see what happens with Man United and obviously what's happened with Rangers up in Scotland.
I mean, that march from Chelsea there, just obviously at the start of the Abramovich era, was just absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah. And then, like you say, Man City taking over, the new club, Man City.
There we go.
And it stops at 2019.
Yeah.
Could you just go back? You can go back to 2019, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Hang on, we need to pause.
There you go.
Yeah, so the average weekly wages there are absolutely phenomenal. Kieran sort of has the Premier League average at around 40,000, but that doesn't look like it on that chart, mainly because the top clubs are paying in excess of 100,000 euros per week, you know, for players. But generally, when you look across the league, it's around 40,000. But I don't really like giving averages. And what's interesting, obviously, in Europe, you don't talk about pounds per week. We always talk about pounds per week in England. I think it's a throwback to the days when the players used to get a pay packet after a game on a Saturday every single week. And obviously it's gross, so tax has to come into play. And that at the moment is around 45% for top players. But I will get into a bit more of that. And obviously, you know, we looked at the big six and what they can do, but also the transfer fees that are paid in the Premier League. You know, we had some big ticket items last year in Havertz and Ruben Diaz, and they're the sort of 60, 70 million area. But obviously transfers in the Premier League, it's not uncommon to have, you know, 20 to 40 million transfers, you know, whether the players, and obviously players are coming from all over Europe, and they're also coming from the Championship in Scotland and other places as well. So those are interesting facts on you know, the Premier League. And obviously everyone wants to get their players into the Premier League. And obviously the Premier League clubs are looking at really just the very, very best players across the planet now. You know, it's global. Their scouting networks, you know, go into many countries. and particularly now, which I think David's going to touch on, South America as well. But let's go to the championship now, because the championship, in the last few years, the finances of the championship clubs have not been good, and obviously it's been exacerbated by what's happened with the pandemic, the lack of fans in stadiums. So the championship finances are very, very poor for most clubs. There is a couple of exceptions. Obviously, those clubs that are coming down from the Premier League and have parachute payments, and those clubs will be strong. Stoke City, I would mention, as a very strong club. They're backed by a betting company that's very, very successful worldwide. So they've got, plenty of funds. But many other clubs in the championship, the finances aren't in a great condition. And I think last summer, the pandemic had started. Last summer, a lot of the championship clubs did sell assets, and there was very few that made any transfer fees. I think Brentford probably led the way with the Ivan Toney deal. They signed Ivan Toney from a League One club, Peterborough, for about 5.5 million, something like that. And he's proved to be the top scorer in the championship. But there was very few transfer deals done last summer in the championship. And I think that's probably going to continue. Weekly wages in the championship, according to Kieran Maguire, who's our football finance expert, who's been on the Football Transfer Forum a number of times, he would put the figure at around sort of 14,000 a week, but certainly that figure is dropping. Clubs this summer are looking to reduce the wage bills substantially. I can see that figure dropping quite a bit. And really, in terms of the Premier League and the Championship, the Premier League has come out better than most leagues in Europe financially with the big TV deal. I think, they'll be even stronger in the marketplace. I do think it'll be a buyer's market. I do think there's a lot of room for loan deals as well. But I think, with the strength of the Premier League and what's happened in France and some of the clubs having financial difficulties in Spain and other territories, it just gives the Premier League a little bit more ammunition. So just to sum up, really, the Premier League is where the money's at. The Championship, probably for transfer deals, they're going to be few and far between. Obviously, everyone is looking at strikers as normal and attacking creative players. And, we know that you're going to have to pay money for those types of players. Right, I'll move on to the agent landscape. So that's a little bit about the club landscape. I'll move on to the agent landscape. So what we've got in England is when FIFA deregulated football agent activity in 2015, there was about 450 licensed agents in England, and those, like myself, had done the exam. Also, had indemnity insurance as well, and we're operating, through the FA, but under the sort of overarching FIFA rules and regs. So that was in 2015. Now the number that's registered in England today is around 2,500. So that's a really big jump. Obviously, a lot of those people are newcomers. They've only just registered in the last 6 years. Some register and then don't do any business, but it's still, a large number. I'm not even sure there's 2,500 professional football players in England, Ryan. I certainly know in the Premier League, you've got a 25-man squad. So you've got about 500 players registered to play in the Premier League, plus all the academy players and what have you. So that is a pretty big number. In England, the large agencies dominate. So we've got the likes of ICM Stella, Wasserman. I think we've got a few guys from Wasserman on the call. Gestifute, Unique Sports Management, and Base, and it's CAA Base now, because what's happened is, and if you look at the initials in front of Stella, which is Jonathan Barnett's company, they've been taken over by an American firm. So it's ICM Stella. Wasserman have taken in Key Sports, which was a big agency in England under their wing, and Base are now a part of CAA Group. So the American influence, the Americans have come in and bought football agencies as well as football clubs. Ryan, I know with you being a Wolves fan, you wanted to say a little bit about Wolves. I've put it in brackets for George Mendes's company.
Well, it's just an interesting situation, isn't it? One that's caused a lot of friction in the game here. Wolves ownership group, which is Fosun International, a big Chinese conglomerate investment firm, own a share of that agency. And certainly the Leeds owner has been particularly upset by that. He owned an agency in Leeds before he acquired the club. So had to sell it, was told he had to sell it, and did so in order to take over the club. And obviously that's not happened at Wolves. And the vast majority of the transfers, of course, have gone through that transfer and have gone through Mendes. And Wolves seem to have a very sort of blatant approach now, to the point that last season the third kit was actually called the Portugal kit. And it was like a replica of Portugal's kit. Wolves have had games where there's been 5-6 Portuguese players in the starting lineup. It's gone a bit quiet on that in terms of whether there would be any conversation over how comfortable people feel about it. I imagine it's wrapped up in some of the regulations that FIFA are talking about as well. But it's an interesting one, and it's one that the other clubs have definitely kept a close eye on.
Yeah, and the head coach as well, I think, is a client of that particular agency, and the new head coach as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think they seem to have quite a lot of players, but they do have players as well in a lot of players in England who don't play for Wolves.
Yeah.
Let's get to I don't know whether anyone's seen the Jerry Maguire film, which the bit I love is Cuba Gooding Jr. If you haven't seen Jerry Maguire, go and see it or get it out on stream or whatever. The show me the money bit, I just love the Cuba Gooding Jr. show me the money. It's a fantastic thing for us agents. Obviously, he's an American football agent, but I'm showing you the money here. These are the payments the FA kindly or they're out in the public domain. So these were the payments made to agents in the last 3 years. So if you look at the Premier League, that's been growing. Even, I suppose last year's figures were slightly, hit by the pandemic, but not really. So 260 million rising to 272 million, massive amounts of money being spent on agents. And obviously that we showed you the chart for the salaries, the moving chart that Kieran Maguire kindly did for us. And, it's directly proportional, isn't it? Agents' fees are linked to what the players are getting, albeit in basic wage. But if you look at the Championship, 50 million in 2018-19, 49 million the next year, and then 41 million. I'm saying that that's going to come right down. I think another, 25% drop. That might, the contracts last summer were a bit lower, and that'll be carrying on this summer. So I can see that figure going down. But those are the sorts of things, earnings that agents can earn with players in England.
And so, sorry, Tony, does who get relegated have an impact on that Championship figure as well? Because we've had Sunderland have been relegated, Newcastle have been relegated, teams that have been paying absolutely enormous wages at the time.
And it depends on those players whether there's reductions in salary due to relegation. If I talked about League One has around payments of about 3 million, 3.5 million, something like that. But those payments will be going a lot lower as well. So really, this is why we're talking about the Premier League and Championship, because it's there for everyone to see. That's the agent landscape. We'll move on to the process, the FA's process for registering as an intermediary. So the money side of things, you know, we've done 8 of these, and I think it varies right across the board. I think there was one was 1,000. Was that the Bundesliga in Germany? Was it 1,000 euros or something like that?
Might have been, yeah.
Maybe somebody in the chat can remind us what the different figures were for some of the territories that they work in. But our registration process, it's fairly straightforward. It's 500 plus VAT to register, and then every year you have to pay your 250 plus VAT. If you miss a year, you have to start again on the 500 registration. And for that, there's a code of conduct that you have to adhere to. You can't be a member of a football club. You can't be a coach. You can't be a manager. You have to be an individual in your own right, not connected to any other football entities. And that's an interesting one when we talk about, George Mendes at Wolves, and there has been other agents as well in football clubs working very, very closely with football clubs. An interesting point for anyone who's outside of England, the FA doesn't discriminate where you're from. Anyone can register. Anyone can register with the FA without any restrictions. It's a different matter if you're going to live here and perform, you work here full time, but you can register. Obviously, you can, if you're bringing a player into England, it is a good idea to register here. You can work with local agents, but it's a good idea to register here. The FA process is quite straightforward. They have something called the intermediary management system. So it's a website that you've got access to, and that website controls all your player contracts. So you can upload your player contracts, your representation contracts on that website. You can it informs you of different changes in the rules and regs, and it keeps it in touch with what's happening in the agent world through that portal. But I must say, it's quite easy. And back in the day, we used to have to photocopy rep contracts, send them out in the post. You just upload them onto the site, the FA checks them, and then off you go. You can, it keeps a record of when they expire, so you can use it as a little bit of an admin tool. Now, the next one is a clearinghouse, and what happens in England is that if you have done a deal with a club in England and you send them an invoice on the date of payment, the club will pay the invoice, but they'll pay it directly to the FA, who then check all the paperwork's right, that you're still registered as an agent, and that everything's fine in terms of what you've done and how you've done it, and all the paperwork stacks up, and then they will pay you from their account. So it sort of bounces from the club to the FA as a clearinghouse, and then down to the agent. It's one of the bugbears of agents in this country, particularly in a summer window. If everyone's putting invoices in the summer for payment, the FA tend to have a bit of a backlog, and it can be 3 weeks, 4 weeks before you even get paid. And even then, sometimes if there's a query, they're not always the best in letting you know there's a query. It's a question of you sort of chasing them and saying, hang on, what's happening with me money? If there's a query, you sort of have to chase them. So it's just something to keep an eye on, really.
And Tony, this is why if you bring in a player to England, or you're obviously operating, you have to be registered as an agent, otherwise that payment isn't going to find its way to you.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the main obvious reason, for registering. The other thing that the FA will do is sanction. They'll sanction agents if you've done something wrong, if you haven't done the paperwork right. I mean, listen, most of the sanctions are to do with working with minors. People haven't filled the paperwork, they haven't understood the rules. I'll talk a little bit about minors, but I think David was going to touch on it as well. And so the FA can fine you sort of like £1,000 or just a fee, and also they can suspend you from activity if you're doing something which is outside of their rules. It's interesting because the FA, I think, have been good at administrating agents generally. I think FIFA are looking at the FA processes to see I think they may have taken some of the things that the FA already do to look at their new rules and regulations. I certainly think that the clearinghouse was one thing that they have picked up from our FA, and you know, as I say, they've been doing agent administration for some time, and you know, generally they're contactable, generally they're open. You know, I'll be able to share some information with you when I mail out to you after this thing about how to contact the FA and all the different departments, but you'll get that in a mail shot after the event. And then working with minors is just something that I'd like you to be aware of. Players who are 16, 17-year-old, if you're going to work with them, you do need to be DBS checked. So you need a check from the FA. You might have a check already, but you definitely need it to be done through the FA. I think there's a £50 charge for that. And also it recommends that you go on a 3-hour safeguarding course, which, you know, I've been on, and I would really, really recommend that you...
Tony, just to cut across you there. So just going back to the sanctions there, the FA, you know, they publish as well, don't they, the agents that have been sanctioned.
Yeah.
And just to re-emphasize that other point about the DBS checks, I think a point where a lot of people fall foul is, you know, they might have a DBS check from a job that they do or something like that, and they make the presumption that they think that is sufficient when in fact it's not.
No, absolutely not. And you know, without that DBS check, and when you have that and you put it in and you then tell them that you've done your safeguarding workshop, which is a 3-hour workshop, then on the IMS system, it will come up as a tick and a yes that you can work with minors. So you can work with 16 and 17-year-old players. Interestingly, you can approach 15-year-old players only in the year of their 16th birthday. So if a player's coming up to 16, say in September, from the 1st of January of that year, you can approach the player, obviously through his family or via a coach or whatever. You can approach the player about signing and start talking about signing that player, but you can't sign him until he's 16 or her until they're 16. So just be aware of that. I know if you're bringing players from Europe, it's slightly different, but those are the sort of things that people slip up on. And the other thing is in your representation contract, if you are having a representation contract with a minor when him or her 16, make sure that the parents or guardians sign that representation contract as well. And the FA have, you know, a standard rep contract that you can use and that you can look at, and they'll probably, if you did want to add to it, you have to have their permission to add to it. But those are the sorts of little things to look out for. I was just going to mention, slightly aside from the FA, our Association of Football Agents, the AFA, they have been running, I think, for about it might be 15 years now. I think, you know, I was there at some of the early meetings of the AFA, and they've always been, you know, championing the corner and banging the drum for agents. You know, we certainly had no representation, no voice whatsoever before the AFA arrived, and at least now we've got a voice. The FA talk to the AFA, listen to the AFA. They have meetings. In fact, the meetings obviously have gone online through COVID. I'll share the link in the chat. But they used to have meetings at Barnet, and I think I'd been to every one apart from the last one at Barnet, which was, I think, 2019. And at that meeting, there was Mino Raiola and George Mendes and the Sky cameras following them. But they are good meetings to attend, and I would recommend anyone, particularly if you're starting up in the business, it's certainly something that you should look at, you know, joining the AFA.
Yeah. Now, Tony, in the other Doing Business series that we've spoke a lot about collaboration and how it's much easier if you're going to go and operate in Italy or France or wherever.
Yeah.
And guys, come on, I'm waiting for these suggestions of places we need to look at. So get them in the chat box. Tony, you know, a lot of your work has been with internationally based agents. You know, how would you describe the sort of openness for cooperation of British agents?
Yeah, I think I think throughout the series, I think the word cooperation has been discussed in several of the parts, the different episodes that we've done, and certainly in my experience, I started in 2002, but around 2005, I was talking to agents based abroad, Spain, Holland, wherever. Because from my point of view, everyone wants to bring the players, or many people want to bring the players into England. And so, having the local knowledge of the clubs, of the people to speak to at the clubs, those things, as you are probably well aware in your own territories, those are the important things to have that network. And I think if you're an agent and you're working in England, I'm very open to working with agents, and I think some of the the tips and things that we're talking about today, the experience that many agents have got about the clubs and how they deal and how they work and who to speak to, I think that's that's vital. And so yeah, I'm open for collaboration and cooperation as well, Ryan. And I mean we sort of use mandates a lot in England for this sort of activity, but the FA, they don't really recognise mandates as a thing. Mandates are just between the individual agents. But yeah, they're widely used in England, right?
Yeah, and I know it seems a sort of a bit of a sort of Neolithic point, but it's also a sort of reality. British clubs, then in terms of some of the key people, if you go to France, if you go to Spain, you go to Italy, there's half a chance that we can converse in English. It's pretty, although there is a bit more of an international feel in terms of the senior people at clubs these days. Generally, there's a requirement there to speak English as well, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I keep apologizing because I speak only one language, so I can only work with agents who can speak English, and it's my problem, not anybody else's problem. We do have Victor Orta at Leeds, the new guy at Tottenham, Arsenal. A lot of the sporting directors, speak many languages. I think it's us in England who don't speak as many, and many of the sporting directors are English, and maybe don't speak as many languages as they perhaps could. So yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thing to know. But look, there's been a massive influx of people at all levels in clubs from the European Union and further afield, and I think that that's made our game so much better. I mean, when you look at the Premier League, I think we must have about 100 countries represented from players, but also the backup staff, the backroom staff, so that, the Premier League, for me, it's a world league, isn't it? It's a world league. And I think people like to see that there's players from Japan, from Colombia, from wherever they are on the planet. If you tune into the Premier League, there's probably a player from there.
Just one final point to yourself, Tony, before we move on to David, and that is we obviously speak a lot about players, but you mentioned it there, coaches as well. I know you've worked bringing in some foreign coaches. How vibrant is that market, do you see, moving forward as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there seems to have been a bit of a trend for German coaches, and it does go in cycles a little bit. Obviously, we've got some fantastic Spanish coaches, and I think I'd be quite critical of the FA's coach education system. It's very difficult to navigate your way through to the FA Pro license, and it's very expensive in this country. I think in some other countries, it's a lot easier and cheaper to get to work up your badges and to get that pro license, which everyone seems to be looking for. In England, it's a very expensive, and not everyone gets the chance to do it. It's a very small cohort of people who do the pro license, and I think we lag behind some of the European nations in the numbers and the quality of our coaches in this country. And I think that's probably why we see clubs going for foreign coaches. I think the other thing is that's been a real breath of fresh air. We now fully integrated with the sporting director model, particularly in the Premier League. There's no longer that model where the manager, like your Arsene Wenger and your Alex Ferguson, are doing everything, are doing all the transfers. We very much Premier League wise switched to that sporting director model, and even further down the leagues, a lot of clubs are adopting that sporting director head coach model that's probably from Germany. And that's another reason why some of the sporting directors are coming from different countries.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for that, Tony. Kim, I've spotted your question there. If you could just do me a favour and copy that question into the Q&A box, I'll make sure we answer that a little bit later on. But let's move on again, and let's introduce David. Hello, good morning again, David.
Hi, you okay, Ryan?
Yeah, very well, thanks. David, before we get into your section, just give us a brief overview about your career today. You're still a young man, but you've done a lot in football already. So just furnish the audience with a bit of your experience, please.
So I've worked in football probably for about coming up to 10 years. Probably met Tony maybe 8 or 9 years ago.
That's always a highlight, David.
Yeah, it's all gone downhill since then, really. And I actually passed the old agents exam in 2013, just sort of when I came out of law school. And at that time, it was really quite a difficult thing to pass. The pass rate was about 5%. I remember sitting in the exam at Wembley. There was an ex-player sat next to me, and I was like, could see his answers, could see my answers, and was like, well, one of us has definitely gone better. And I passed. And I actually bumped into him. He's a scout now, so it obviously didn't go down the agent route. But since then, I operated as intermediary for a period of time. Mainly people were using my license. And off the back of that, I qualified as solicitor, and have sort of built my practice advising agents, players, and clubs and a wide range of issues within football, sport in general, and commercial law as well. And the practice has been really good over the years. Been fortunate enough to do deals in the Premier League, deals in La Liga, Bundesliga, Liga in France, Serie A, many disputes as well. We've been to the CAS, the FIFA Dispute Resolution Chamber, etc. So the firm I work for as well, Branco, has a really good reputation in this field too. And I like to think that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to doing business here, because a lot of my clients are agents here or are foreign agents who regularly do business here.
Fantastic, excellent. Well, let's get into it. Before we get into the specifics, Tony touched on it at the start. We're always on sort of shifting sands in football, certainly in this country. But in terms of the sort of legal standpoint, how dynamic has the last 2 or 3 years been in terms of regulations and the changing nature of the structures of the game?
Well, it's massive. Massive for 2 reasons. I'll come on to those when I sort of get into it a bit. Is obviously you've got Brexit, and then you've got sort of HMRC's recent guidance, which completely goes straight through what is the sort of common standard form practice of how agents get paid, and that's going to change, I think. And those 2 key changes very recently are going to be big. I mean, generally speaking, the industry, in my opinion, is changing. Tony pointed to the fact there were 500 agents, now there are 2,500 agents. And I think, yeah, you've got the big agencies who have got quite a monopoly over some areas, but also you're seeing more and more family members getting involved, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's, they're experts in the welfare of the player because they're related to them. So that might not necessarily be a bad thing, but also you're seeing maybe more family members aligning to either the big agencies or experienced agent. And you'll find that there might be an agent who can be very successful, but only represent 2 or 3 players because they're top players. And also, I'm finding from speaking to players in particular that they're more open to the personal service. Now, whether that be from a big agency or a small agency, it doesn't really matter. It's not necessarily the brand as such that's selling the brand of the agency that's being sold to the players, more the in particular agent. So that's quite interesting how things have developed with that as well. And obviously, you've seen quite a few like prominent players who are represented by like family members. Rashford, for instance, is everywhere, but then he works, I think, with Rock Nation Sports.
Yeah,
so that's a good example.
There's been some great stories of family members doing quite well out of deals over the years as well, haven't there? That's always great for the autobiographies. I think Jermaine Defoe's family did well out of the Tottenham deal and what have you. But like you say, they're experts in the welfare of their members. So let's get into it. And it remains the sort of elephant in the room, doesn't it? Brexit. So talk to us about Brexit. What are the implications? How's it changed the market?
So for me, obviously Brexit is the single biggest change that you're going to face as an intermediary operating both within the UK or operating outside of the UK, looking to bring players into England, because historically that was where the big ticket was. You bring a player to the Premier League, you get a big commission, your player gets paid really well. That's all going to change, really. Probably not at the top level, but when you're looking down into the Championship and the lower end of the Premier League, the market that those clubs can shop in is way smaller now.
Yeah.
So you look at what we'll get in, and Tony will get into it later when he talks about the calculator for something called the governing body endorsement. But basically, players can come here based on the amount of points they can acquire from previous clubs. And you've got like the Austrian League, the Danish League, second tier in Spain, second tier in France, that have historically like quite good leagues for low-end Premier League or like top Championship clubs to go and take players from. Players at those clubs, unless they've got UK passports, are going to really struggle to get the required amount of points to come and play here. Conversely, though, and this is where I think there'll be a bit of a shift, is in South America. So whereas historically you would speak to, I don't know, a director of football at a club and he'd say, well, as long as he's got the EU passport, I'll listen to him. But if he's got an EU passport and he's not regular international, then we're wasting our time. Because we don't have the time to put into work permits all the time, because we've got to move quickly to get players and etc. But then you're looking at the Mexican League, the Brazilian League, the Argentinian League are ranked higher from a band point of view than, say, the second tier in France. So you've got players play the same amount of games in, could have players play regularly in the Brazilian League, isn't an international. Pre-Brexit wouldn't have got a work permit here. No, probably will.
Yeah.
So that's a big shift. I mean, the other change is that you tend to find that the South American clubs aren't as wealthy. So in a market where you've got sort of decreasing revenues as a result of the pandemic, although our students in the Premier League is a little bit recession-proof.
David, I think what's interesting as well about that, and we did doing business in Portugal. Portugal, the player from Brazil would come over, land in Portugal, have a good season or two, and then be sold to a bigger club potentially in the Premier League. And we saw that with, a number of players. Is that going to be, coming direct from Brazil, for example, and missing out the Portugal step? Is that going to happen more often?
Potentially. But then you've also got the way clubs have also set up. They're acquiring clubs on the continent to try and get that talent before they could sort of maybe bring them to play in a league that would then get more points, if you know what I mean, as well.
Yeah.
Or also or until they buy the times of getting enough international caps. What is interesting about the GBE, and I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail in a second, is that you can sign a player, like let's say you identify a player who's playing in Europe, who's in the second tier in France, who's not going to be good enough, who's not going to have enough points to come and play here. You can sign him, you just can't play him. So it might be the sort of thing where like you'll see a lot of players being signed and then loaned back out until either they get the required points or they go to a league where they might play enough minutes in, like, let's say that you sign them from second tier France, loan them to first tier France for a season. So they'll get enough points then to then come back. that's something that might happen. Or it's still so new though, because we've had one transfer window with Brexit. At that point, Brexit came in on the opening of the transfer window, so it was all like chaos. My experience being to agents were that clubs were very much looking at, we'll buy what we know we can buy. We're not going to be looking at trying to get too many of these governing body endorsement things through or go into the exemptions panel because we don't have the time. We don't have the sort of track record. That'll change now because, you know, we've known about it for 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to ask David, so you've identified a player in Brazil or whatever. What's the actual physical process of getting a GBE? What's the paperwork? What's the form?
So it's really for the club to do, but obviously the more the agent can assist, the better. They fill out a form. It itemises who the player is, where they've played, number of minutes they've played domestically, continentally. This is another thing why you might see more players coming from top South American leagues, is because the Copa Libertadores is ranked on a par with the Champions League from a points perspective.
Yeah.
So teams that are playing in the first few rounds of that competition, players will get more points for that.
Yeah.
You fill out a form. You annex to the form, like, you know, probably a draft employment contract, draft transfer agreement. So there's no point signing all these things before the work permit application is granted. You pay £500, and if you've got the right amount of points or you've got enough international appearances, then you're in. You need 15 points if you don't get through the auto pass. That international appearance calculator, which is quite broad for sort of the top clubs, but you might have someone who's only just broken onto the international scene, or you might have someone who plays for a small African nation but is actually a top player in a certain place. Because the nations also are ranked in accordance with the FIFA ranking. Then they've got to get 15 points. The points are, as I say, calculated by reference to the previous league. So you've got band 1, band 2, all the way down to band 6. And as I was saying, that leagues where English clubs tend to shop around for a bit of a bargain, particularly like top championship clubs. And Tony was saying before, you've got like more German managers in the second tier here. You've got the Spanish manager at Huddersfield Town. Like, you'd think they'd be looking to go into those markets. It's going to be difficult for them to do that now. You acquire the points, and if you get 15 points, you're in. If on the form, when you add the points up, you're between 10 and 14, you can have the matter referred to an exemptions panel. The exemptions panel is basically 3 people sit there, one's legally qualified, they each have a vote, and it's quite like a broad brush approach. Is they've got a lot of discretion. You provide evidence to the panel to show that there's an exceptional circumstance where the player hasn't got 15 points. So it's something that in law we call the but-for test. So but for this, he would have got 15 points. So examples would be injuries is an obvious one. Examples I've seen are players not being played because they won't sign a new contract at the club. So we say, like, if he would have, really would have played. He's played all the way through the season, but for this decision of him not signing the contract, they're not playing him, he would have got it. And the other one is, other than exceptional circumstances, obviously we just had the pandemic. That's going to be some leagues paused or whatever. And the other one is if a youth player has exceptional talent, and they're looking at like witness evidence from coaches, scouts, experts. But in our heads, we think youth player, we think 18-year-old, but a youth player for the purposes of these rules is basically anyone born after the 1st of Jan 2020. 1st of Jan, 2020, sorry. Not 2020.
2000.
1st of Jan 2000, sorry. God, it makes me feel old. 1st of Jan 2000, so basically 21-year-olds right now, which actually isn't that young. You know, you could have 100 first team appearances at this age. So that's really quite good. To go to the exemptions panel, you've got to pay £5,000. Always, you know, there's always a way of getting a bit of money out of this.
Absolutely, yeah.
For the regulator. And they really decide on the papers. You can have a hearing, but they decide on the papers. And that's basically the process to get this thing called GBE governing body's endorsement.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds a bit X Factory, doesn't it? You turn up and then you have to sort of, maybe he's doing some keep me ups with the ball on fire or something like that. Overall, David, how comfortable or impressed or not impressed have you been with the authorities' handling of how they've dealt with Brexit and transfers and the creation of this GBE system?
It's too early to say. I don't really have a massive opinion of being good or bad right now. I think there are flaws. One of my clients is a super player who definitely would be an amazing asset here, who we've done the calculation so many times and just can't get him to 15 points. And the club are doing well, they're getting into Europe, etc. And he still can't get to 15 points. And I'm looking at him like, well, actually, like from a country point of view, he'll probably come here, low-end Premier League, top championship, 18 to 25 grand a week. So from a tax point of view, he's going to be paying loads of income tax into the country. Yeah. From a public services point of view, I highly doubt he's going to be getting public transport or using the NHS. So realistically, like you're cutting your nose off to spite your face by stopping sort of high net worth people coming here. But then, like I say, the country voted for rules, and the government try and enforce them. And I guess if I was on the exemptions panel, I'd look at, and they do look at the value, and they do look at like the Home Office generally would look at when they look at someone coming from to immigrate here. They would look at things like that, like employment,
sure,
stuff like that. So it's very early to say. I guess one of the big downsides though is as a result of Brexit, the UK have lost that exemption to sign FIFA minors, so players under 18. So people don't realise this, but as a general rule, that you can't have an international transfer of a player under 18 unless one of the exceptions was it was between EU member states with various other rules. And obviously, England's not in the EU anymore, so they don't qualify for that exemption. So to sign players, they've got to be over 18.
Yeah, and that for some of the clubs, certainly the top end Premier League clubs, is going to be a bit of a shift, because you look through some of the academy teams, and even first year academy teams, they're like world 11s, aren't they?
Well, my biggest client came to England from France as like 15, 16-year-old.
Yeah.
And now he wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's
just a quick one.
Helps him progress.
Yeah, just a quick one before we move on from the GBE. In terms of the home nations, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, I'm not counting them as a home nation, the common travel area, is there any differentiation there?
I mean, there's like a special pact between Scotland and England. They can move players back and forward. But even then, and the rules actually, and I know this is doing business in England, not doing business in Scotland, but the rules in Scotland, for instance, to get a GB are slightly easier because you've got all the criteria that we have here. But then there's sort of like a caveat at the end where you get additional points if the player's salary is going to be X amount of times more than the average salary for the league, which obviously is like quite beneficial if you've got two clubs that pay quite a lot more money than anyone else in the league.
Those could be.
Yeah. It's St Mirren, isn't it?
St Mirren and St Johnstone,
Yeah, but so that's that sort of leaves it open for those clubs to still sign decent foreign players. And actually, maybe that's a good thing for the likes of Celtic and maybe that's a good thing for Scottish football, because they may look at an opportunity here where there's talent here that might have gone to the Championship, but maybe we'll be able to fix it.
Yeah. I don't know whether anybody else saw it, but there was a clip on YouTube of Riyad Mahrez talking about the trial that he had at St Mirren. And it's incredible to think that, they didn't sign him. Somebody, whoever didn't sign him must be kicking themselves, but he was at St Mirren for a couple of weeks on trial, which was quite amazing.
Absolutely. David, let's move on to the changes that HMRC are bringing in, especially around dual rep. So I think if you could start off with a bit of definition in terms of how HMRC define dual rep, and then take the story from there.
Well, without like, I know there's a lot of people on this call who have like been agents for a long time, and some that are probably quite new to it. So, without like being too dumbed down, I guess the way an agent will typically get paid in this country, particularly, I mean, pretty much Premier League throughout the Football League, is that you have an agent, player, rep contract, and then that'll say agent gets 5% of the player's salary, and then they'll actually rock up at the club, and they'll sign something called a tripartite agreement, which is dual representation, where what we'll say is in this new tripartite agreement, ignore what it says in that rep contract, that's superseded by this contract. That 5%, let's call that 5% 100 grand. What we're going to do is we're going to call, of that 100 grand, you're going to get 2.5%, so 50 grand for player services, 50 grand for club services. And the club services are paid directly by the FA Clearinghouse to the agent for services he provides to the club in essentially bringing the player to the club, negotiating the deal to the club. The player services are paid by the club to the agent by the clearinghouse, but it goes down on something called the player's P11D as a taxable benefit to the player. So what HMRC look at that and say is, well, if you're the player's agent and you're bringing the player to the club, why is not 100% of this commission paid essentially as a P11? You can pay it on behalf of the player, but why is it not all paid as a P11D? And that is what HMRC have an issue with right now. And HMRC, for those not here, are the tax authorities that govern England, govern the United Kingdom. So that has always been the way. It's industry practice. You know, you split it 50% down the middle. I mean, we've done deals in the past where it's maybe like 70-30 or 60-40 either way. And but really most deals it's split 50-50 down the middle. Now, HMRC issued some new guidance on the 1st of April 2021, which is sort of like horse and carriage through this. They said absolutely no way do we think that the default position should be a 50-50 split. You agent represent the player, and actually how can you represent both parties in a transaction? Yeah. There's a clear conflict of interest there, and there is, and it always has been that way, but that's just the way it is. And you know, the rep contracts I issue out to my clients that are different to the FA standard one make provision for that, because I've seen disputes as a result of that. And basically what HMRC says, there's a complete conflict here, because you represent the player, so you want the player to have the biggest wage, because big wage for the player means bigger commission for you. But you also represent the club, and surely in any commercial transaction, you want to, whatever you're buying, you want it for as cheap as possible. So those two things don't marry up. And HMRC say now that if you are to act for both parts in the transaction, which will happen, you need to provide evidence and commercial justification that you actually are also acting for the club. So the obvious argument that is being raised is that if you represent a player and you bring him to a club, he's going to that club as opposed to other clubs. So you are providing services to the buying club, because you're making sure that player signs his contract with the buying club. And also the way these agreements are drafted, you provide further ongoing services to maintain like a stable and harmonious relationship between the club and the player as well. You provide an extra service there. Now, HMRC are a bit like, get that if you're bringing a player to a club. But this dual rep 50-50 split is applied when a player signs a new contract at a club he's been at for 10 years. How have you provided services? So where is the commercial justification to say that you've brought the guy to the club? And the agent's argument then is like, well, I've kept him there because so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so wanted to buy him, and I've been in his ear the whole time saying, no, you don't want to move the club, you want to stay here. So HMRC are willing to hear submissions on contract renewals. And actually, I've looked at 2 contract renewals recently, and the club blanket said we're not taking a risk if it's a renewal 100% going on the P11D.
Wow.
But then I've looked at, then I've had a couple of deals already come in where it's new players being signed, and it's just, 50-50, off we go as normal. And I guess the key bits of advice for club, player, and agent is that, and this is a bit of advice I've been giving to my clients for many years because I saw this coming, is keep an audit trail of what you do. For instance, if you do a deal for a player at a specific club, keep a note of all the meetings you've had with that club. Keep a note of all the meetings you've had with the person at that club, even when you work for different clubs. So when you turn up at, if HMRC look at it and they say, right, so-and-so signed for Man City, what services you provide to the club? You say, well, actually, whilst this guy was playing in France, like 6 years ago, we were meeting with City then to discuss him potentially coming here. And for every 3 months for the last 6 years or whatever, I've sent an email to City saying, this is what he's been up to, look how he's been playing, this is the situation, and we've continually monitored the situation. And that is me providing services to you. Obviously, it's for the benefit of the player to move the player.
No, that's great advice.
Also, something being provided to the club. And even if it's a casual meeting with a club, a lot of the clubs, Premier League clubs' offices in London, even if you just rock up there for a meeting, keep a note of it. If you have a telephone call with someone, keep a note of it. And that basically will show, if HMRC ever came knocking, a commercial justification for you providing services to the club and doing the deal.
I think that's great. I think that is great advice, David. And Tony, would you say it's fair, perhaps, that's not a sort of mainstream activity of most agents? Keep that, they might keep a diary, but in terms of something more formal.
Yeah, no, it's not. I certainly haven't been doing it. I know the HMRC were at one of the AFA meetings, and this was going back about 3 years ago, and they did say, "Oh, we're comfortable with 50-50," and that's changed, as David points out. So it came as a bit of a shock to people when they said at a public meeting of the AFA, we're comfortable with 50-50. We're not so comfortable about 70-30 or 80-20, in the club's favour, so that it reduces the tax. And obviously they're just collecting tax for the country, aren't they?
Yeah.
There's big money here.
Yeah.
You're showing the agents' fees, and you're showing the players' salaries going up. So 50% because of getting tax loads.
I mean, there is some clubs that are literally doing the deals as the agents working for the club exclusively, and no player contract, no player representation contract. So yeah,
but there's a big risk, that, Tony, because ultimately, when you look behind the transaction, and I've seen it, and I've advised on deals like that, and advised on a deal like that in January, but not in England. But it's a risk because really you represent the player, and you'll hold yourself out as representing the player. If it's a genuine situation where you are being appointed by a club to go and source someone else's player, then fine. But if you are basically going to say, what we'll do is we'll rip up our rep contract, or we never had a rep contract, but we had like a sort of agreement by conduct, and you're just going to be there just providing services to the club purely to avoid a P11D payment, the avoid word there is like quite damning, isn't it? It's a risk that's probably not worth taking.
Yeah. Okay. Are you okay, Ryan, there?
Yeah, no, absolutely fine. Just one more thing I'd like you to briefly touch on, David, if that's okay. And that is, what's the process for a dispute resolution?
So dispute resolution is something I do a lot of, particularly in this game. A lot of people falling out with each other fairly frequently. And Tony mentioned the M word before, a word that I don't like my clients using, which is mandate, which basically means nothing. It's a statement of intent. It's not enforceable. It's not binding. It's not a contract. If you're going to do deals with other intermediaries or use a subcontract, not the FA standard one, that's rubbish. Use a properly drafted one, or even an intermediary commission split agreement. Don't use a mandate, because a mandate is an opportunity for you to be cut out of a deal. If someone's willing to give you a mandate, they should be willing to give you a subcontract or enter into some sort of commission split agreement. Let's say there's a dispute. If you're a registered intermediary with the FA, you're termed automatically to be something called a participant, which is basically anyone involved in football is a participant. So coaches, managers, agents. and all participants are party to an arbitration agreement under the Arbitration Act. And it basically means that if you want to sue somebody who's also a participant, you can't go to court. You've got to go to something called arbitration, FA Rule K arbitration, which actually people think it's like FA arbitration, like the FA will arbitrate. It's not. The FA just facilitate the process for an independent arbitrator. So let's say I bring a claim against another agent for an agent. We'll put our case to the FA. They'll have 14 days to respond. The FA's legal department hold those, and then either the parties agree an independent arbitrator, or 3 of them, or if they can't agree, the FA pick one, and then it's like the FA have nothing to do with it. The arbitrator decides on the case, and then once the award is given, it remains confidential. But let's say Tony, I sue Tony, and Tony's got to pay me 100 grand. He doesn't pay me. I can then go to the FA and say he's breached. Can you sanction him?
Mm-hmm.
Where that is good but limited is that it's a great process. It's quicker than court. It's cheaper than court.
Sure.
It's FA arbitration, so it's like if you get an award against an intermediary who doesn't operate or practice in the UK, you're going to get this FA award and you're going to try and enforce it against him elsewhere. It's quite difficult. So I tend to make provisions in the agreements I draft for agents who are doing business in the UK, but there's a cross-jurisdictional element to it. There's a forum that you can go to. There's a court arbitration for sport, for example, where you can go and hear a dispute if you think that the FA might be, an award there might be moot, essentially. So there's that for dispute resolution. The only way I have been to court for disputes outside of the arbitration system, whether it be the FA system or the CAS, is if there's like an insolvency event. So often you'll have clubs not wanting to pay commission, but they'll say like, "Oh, like we do owe it you. We'll pay you next month. Pay next month. Pay next month." And eventually, you as an agent will turn around and say, "Taking the mick here. Like we just pay me now." And because there's no dispute as such in relation to the money being owed, I've referred and issued sort of winding up petitions against people, clubs, well not banks against people, but winding up petitions against clubs or intermediaries that have breached, that have just refused to pay, essentially, where there's no dispute. And then that's a way of sort of getting your money out as well, because nobody wants like a petition to be published, essentially. Bank accounts get frozen and that sort of thing. You're not allowed to dissipate your assets pending the hearing of the petition. So that's quite an effective way. Sort of in the last 12 months, because of COVID, we've lent towards more the arbitration route, but even for admitted debts, because there's something called the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act, which has sort of made insolvency proceedings more difficult to bring as a result of the pandemic, but that's only a temporary measure. That'll be finished in a few months anyway.
Very good.
That's basically it.
David, thank you very, very much. Really, really insightful. I know a lot of people have appreciated all of that advice. Tony, let's get the calculator out. Let's have a go at the calculator. Do you want to introduce it, talk about it? What does it do? Why should people have a think about using it?
Yeah, Ryan, I'm just going to try and get the calculator up on my screen. I'm just struggling a little bit here. Hold on a second. That's where it is. Right, I've got to share the screen. Right, I'm hoping that that'll do it. Yeah, that's it. I'm just going to share the screen now. So this is, it's Catenaccio AI, and it's a GB calculator. Exactly what it says on the tin, that's what it does. Funnily enough, the GB rules that came out just before the January transfer window, they've been updated and slightly tweaked, and the latest additions to them, the latest update was the 4th of June. So you can see it there. It's simple enough to use. We talked about the bands. So here the bands. Band 1 is the big 5 leagues: Premier League, Bundesliga, La Liga, Serie A. And, you know, players in those leagues will get through this, get either an automatic pass, or they'll get more than 15 points. Band 2, you can see the leagues there, the championships in Band 2. Eredivisie is in there, the Portuguese league. Band 3, the Russian league, Scottish Prem, Argentinian and Brazilian. You go down to Band 4, Austria, Switzerland, Czech leagues. And also in Band 4, you've got La Liga 2 and the second division in France as well, which have obviously been a real shopping market for clubs in England over the years, particularly Brentford. You know, Brentford have signed a couple of players from League 2 in France who went on for a lot of money. The Danish Super League was moved up from Band 5 into Band 4. And then you go to Band 5, and those are the sort of the lowest level ones that are named. And everywhere else is in Band 6. And as David rightly said, it's a case of also, if you're a national team player in the top 50, that helps your points and sometimes gives you an automatic pass. If you participate in the Champions League or the Copa Libertadores, that helps with your points. And basically, this is my system. You know, I'll put a name in, and these names they're out of my scouting book. So this is a player, Anthony, who I saw at the tournament Maurice Revelot, formerly the Toulon tournament, on its last edition at 2019. He went straight into the scouting book, and then he moved to Ajax of Amsterdam. So let's see what we get when we check Anthony's player status. A big club like Ajax, I think, was it Band 2 Eredivisie? The calculator's working. Let's see what it comes up with. Yeah, so there you go. That's his reading. 33 points is way enough. He's eligible. And it gives you a little bit of a breakdown there. So if you can see the Band 2 is the Netherlands. The fact that they've been in the Europa League quarterfinals gets him 5 points. The fact that the title winners gets another 5 points. And you can see how that total can add up pretty quickly. So yeah, he's one who's obviously eligible. I'll do another one, which is another player who's on my scouting radar. So if these end up having big moves, you heard it here first. And this is, I think he's Almeria, second league actually in Spain. So if we've got any Spanish agents on and you represent this player, well, I like him. Let's see what it comes up with. Yeah, so it's 9 points out of 15 not eligible. And let's see where he got his points. So it's a Band 4, which I think is pretty low for the Spanish second division. It's a good league. It's pretty low. You get 6 points for that league, and then he gets 3 points because he's played 64% of the games. So he wouldn't be eligible. If he moves into the top league in Spain, as soon as he gets on the pitch, he'll be eligible. And then the final player that I'll give you the example of, he's a player that I like from Bochum. We had the managing director of Bochum on the doing business in Germany, and they ended up being league winners in the second division. So this guy is a centre half. Let's see what he comes up with in the checker. Taking a bit of time to work its magic. Now and this is why I've used these 3 examples. The first one passed, second one failed. He is gone 11 points, so he's available. So anything 10 to 14 points are available for the exceptions panel, sorry. And that exceptions panel will only be sitting in summer. The FA have decided that they'll do away with it after this summer. I think it's going to be in process this summer. But of course, what David said about, if a club wants to sign this player, they can go to the exemptions panel and make a case for him. And I'm sure with Bochum going up into the Bundesliga 1, within as soon as he steps on the pitch in the Bundesliga, all this will change. And I think that's what's interesting, because you can do this yourself, and I'll send everybody out the guidelines in an email afterwards. But you can do this yourself, but in actual fact, it's changing all the time. And obviously, we've got the Euros on at the moment, and if a young player steps onto the pitch and gets an international cap, that will change his points. So, last night, if there was somebody from Sweden maybe coming on the pitch who hadn't made it, makes an international debut, that will change his points. And obviously this is taking it up to date with every game that's being played. So it's a useful tool that I use. I think you can see it there, Catenaccio AI. There is other tools out there in the marketplace. It's just the one that I use.
Excellent. Thanks, Tony. Let's just use the rest of the time that's available to get through some of the questions. So let's go back to a question from earlier on from Kim. Tony, I'll ask you, why haven't there been enough Asian players playing in Europe? As Kim says, as an aspiring agent in South Korea, I'd like to see more Sons or Parks play in England. I guess that's one for you as well, David. Does the GBE situation open the door up to those territories as well?
I'll go first. I think there is some very good players in Asian football. We haven't had historically that many, and obviously we need the top internationals to come to the Premier League, I suppose. So that's probably one of the main reasons. I can't really speak for why the clubs have chosen which players they choose from which area, but I think those are probably the main reason that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, David, what do you see top Asian footballers having an easier road into the UK?
Yeah, probably. Depending on the quality of the league they play in.
Yeah.
If they're playing in a league that might mean that player will get more points now. I don't see why not. I mean, we've got Son is obviously one of the best players here at the moment. So if there can be more Sons playing domestically in Korea, Japan, those sorts of leagues, which historically are quite good leagues anyway, don't see why not.
Interesting. Elliot asks, I think this is one for you, David. Do you think the FA should add points for a player who has previously played and lived in England for a certain number of years prior to Brexit? I think I'll add a bit of my own question onto there. So do you think what the rules are, they'll be looked at again anytime soon?
So the rules are decided by the FA in consultation with the Home Office. So it probably isn't really for the FA. It's not the FA to decide. They'd have to go back and put that scenario to the Home Office. What I have seen though is that if a player has let's say a player's here on a GBE already and they want to sign for a new club, they would need a new GBE.
Oh, really?
Although they'd get one easily because obviously the Premier League and Championship have got big points to them. But it goes with the sort of the ethos is that they might think, well, there's no need to do that because if you played here previously.
Yeah, I mean, EU nationals, David, have if they're already in this country playing football and they're EU national, it's actually until the 30th of June. They have until the 30th of June to apply for settled status.
Yeah.
So if your player is already here, just double check that the club will probably do it for them. But if they're coming out of contract, they've got till the 30th of June to register themselves as having settled status here, and that'll mean that they can continue their football employment.
But just to go back to that, there's another comment from Can, who wasn't able to bring a player to the Championship, even though he's currently playing in the Euros. The country has a low FIFA ranking, and the league he plays for in Band 6. I mean, David, do you see the Home Office revisiting the rules? Do you think that is a likely situation, or?
I don't know. I think it's too early to say. If there's big complaints or if there's no business done, then maybe they'll go back to it. I mean, it's interesting scenario. I'm involved in a very similar scenario in January where I think it was when we actually spoke last forum. It was mentioned by Seb Allardyce, came out of West Brom, was like a couple of players who we want to sign, we can't. One of the players that that one of my clients represents him involved quite closely with is playing against some really good teams in a really good league. That's band 6. It's the Ukrainian Premier League. Keeping clean sheets and doing really well against the likes of Shakhtar and Dynamo Kiev that have got really good players, and can't come here, can't get enough. Whereas historically, it wouldn't have been EU passport, it would be there no problem. So yeah, it's a difficult one.
Tony, going into this first summer of this situation, how what in terms of your other agent colleagues that you speak to, do people feeling comfortable with it? Of course, there's a bigger opportunity potentially for domestic players as well. Where's the overall gauge for you?
Yeah, there is a better opportunity for domestic players, and obviously clubs outside of the Premier League are looking in the sort of English market for players, so it's better for them lower down the leagues as we go. I don't think the Premier League is going to be massively affected. I think if they want a player, it might be that they can bring them direct from South America, which is going to be a real benefit. I know on the Doing Business in Brazil, one of the guys represents a Brazilian who came directly into Watford and has done really, really well. And he's obviously going to be plying his trade in the Premier League. So, it's already starting that way. But I think generally gauging from agents, the Premier League, it's going to be a tough window in the Championship. It really is. If people are wanting transfer fees, it's going to be really hard to place them in clubs in the Championship. And I think we'll see quite a lot of loan deals and maybe even some swap deals as well, which are very hard to do.
Finally, guys, do you see a scenario where any of the other sort of action out of the Euros will impact people's interest in them? I always talk about going back to Euro '96, Poborski having a fantastic tournament, and United eventually taking him on it. Tony, is there anybody that's caught your eye that's kind of come out of nowhere and you think like, oh, they're decent?
I don't think people are coming out of nowhere, because I think most of the players are known to clubs in England. When it first came in, the GBE stuff, the scouting departments had to sort of write off 40% of the players they've been scouting because they didn't fit in. But certainly at the Euros, I mean, the Czech Republic striker who scored them wonder goals against Scotland, he's made a bit of a reputation for himself, hasn't he? But he didn't do much against England. I don't think he looked tidy on the ball, but he didn't do a great deal. I'm sure there's going to be more coming out in the next, now we're getting down to the last 16. You'll see a few more come to the fore. And obviously Italy, the Italian players are known to everyone, but they've massively performed really, really well in this tournament. I noticed we've got Roberto on. Maybe he can say a few words about the Netherlands. No,
hi, Tony.
Hi,
Roberto.
Hi, Roberto. Are you okay?
Hi, guys. Good to see you. First of all, hectic times again. So, I thought that during the Euros it would be a little bit more relaxed, but we are now also with all the COVID restrictions going down. I see that the whole football world and the transfer world is heating up again. So I had my camera off and on mute because in the meantime there are some issues that I need to organize. First, I was listening to David and Tony. I saw your the product that you just
the calculator GBE. Amazing. You need that, don't you?
Yeah, it's really good. And actually, I was sending a text to a colleague of mine at the University of Amsterdam, where I'm part of the department on labor law and sport. And I said, this is typically an example of a product that is sports based, but it has a huge impact, on labor law and labor market regulation, basically. Because in what other sectors do we have such a sexy program, calculating when a player can move to the UK and
To be honest, Roberto, I'm getting people asking me, "Oh, can you just have a look at this player and can you check that player for me?" So I'm busy with it,
That's quite interesting. Let's talk about that later. Ryan, you had specific questions concerning the Netherlands in relation to.
Tony?
Yeah, it was just, what's your view on the Euros for the Netherlands? We're about to finish, but what are you thinking?
Well, you have the impression that I'm Dutch, obviously. I understand that, but I'm quite happy that Portugal made it through the next round.
Well, you sort of represent Netherlands for us, so
I know, I understand, and I always choose the one that's best in the tournament. Of course, that's the easiest thing. Now, I think that on a serious note, I think that the Netherlands has surprised us all, basically. There was a lot of criticism in the Netherlands on the Boer's tactics that were not in line with what we were used to, the style of play in the Netherlands. And well, we were surprised because he obviously got good results, also with a good game. But the Dutch are, a bit skeptical always. So although we start to have the orange feeling again, the orange fever, in my opinion, the example of sports specificity, in legal terms, what makes sports special? Well, all these crazy people dressed in orange dancing around the streets, so that's fascinating. So that's coming up again in society, which is good. We need a bit of positivity, obviously, but what have been the challenges? We've had Ukraine, North Macedonia, and in Austria. And if you compare it to a group, of France, Germany, Portugal, and Hungary, it's a total different package. But if I'm correct, I was just looking at it this morning. I think the next game of the Dutch is the Czech Republic, and then it's the winner of if that game will be won, it's the winner of Denmark, and I don't know who Denmark is playing. So they're not in the strongest. Sorry,
Wales, I think Denmark.
Yeah, exactly. So, in all honesty, that should be doable. I would say. So it'll be quite fascinating to see how far this team will go. But yeah, well, I represent the Netherlands. You represent England. So I think the tournament's over for you guys.
Pretty much.
Not yet.
Not yet. No, it's going to be a great match. It's going to be a great match.
We've been practicing our penalties. We have. I'm sure. Yeah. I'm sure Gareth has.
Good to see you, Roberto. Thanks for that. Just Tony, one more thing before we let people go. Just to let people know about the webinar that we're doing next month. Just want to give people a flavour of what that's about.
Yeah, what we're going to do is we've done 8 parts of the Doing Business In series, and I've enjoyed absolutely every one of them. We're going to sort of bring the band back together, and some of the people who contributed to them other 8 parts are going to come on and just give us a little overview of how the transfer window has started and how it's looking in their particular territory. So we'll try and get as many people from all of the countries that we've visited through the series to contribute. And, that'll just be really interesting for agents if you just want to test the water across Europe. I think we'd like to get Marcus Motter on to talk about Brazil because of what we've talked about in the marketplace as well. And maybe Bruno Satan from France. And, we've had some real good successes. Patricia Lopez Silva at Sporting Lisbon, they won the title for the first time in 19 years. And as I mentioned before, Ilya Kenzig, their team Bochum, got promoted to the Bundesliga. So it's been a great series, and we're just sort of bringing it to a close of this particular chapter of it. And this will be a good way of doing it. And hopefully people will get a lot out of it in terms of understanding the wider transfer market around Europe.
Brilliant. Thank you for everybody for tuning in today. David, thank you for your time and insight. Roberto, great to see you. And Tony, thanks also as well. Hope everybody enjoys the football over the rest of the tournament, and everybody stay well and safe. And thank you for tuning in. Have a great Thursday.
Thanks, guys. See you. Cheers.